there is a dream you have had before. Maybe it is the same person, someone you have not spoken to in years, standing in a room that no longer exists. Maybe it is the running dream, the one where your legs will not move, where something behind you is close. Maybe it is a building you keep returning to, a hallway you know but cannot explain, a moment that replays like a film stuck in the same reel. You wake up and think, why is this still here? Why does my mind keep going back? Science calls this the unfinished business of your sleeping brain. And what it has found is stranger and more beautiful than any interpretation you have been given. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. The most careful thing about a recurring dream is not what it contains. It is that it keeps coming back at all, and every night it returns. Your brain is making the same quiet argument. This is not finished yet. And now we begin. You have probably been told that recurring dreams mean something is wrong with you, that the mind replays nightmares or unresolved scenes because it is broken, or stuck, or overwhelmed. But that is not what the science shows. What researchers have found is that the brain repeats a dream for the same reason it rehearses a speech or replays a conversation. Because something in that experience has not yet been fully processed. The repetition is not the problem. It is the solution the brain is attempting. It is your mind's most faithful expression of the belief that resolution is still possible, that the door is still open, and something in you is still trying to walk through it. Recurring dreams appear across cultures, across ages, across people who have never met and will never meet, and they share a striking resemblance: being chased, being unable to move, returning to a place from the past, losing teeth, losing direction, losing someone. The universality of these themes is not coincidence. It suggests that recurring dreams are not random noise generated by a restless brain. They are structured signals. And the structure points towards something the sleeping brain is trying, again and again, to accomplish. The signal is the same in every language. Only the words around it change. During REM sleep, the brain does something it cannot easily do. While awake, it processes emotional memory without the chemical that produces fear. Norepinephrine, the stress chemical most associated with anxiety and threat response, is almost completely suppressed during REM. This means REM sleep creates a unique neurochemical environment, one in which the brain can re-examine emotionally charged memories without the full force of the original distress. Neuroscientist Matthew Walker describes this as overnight therapy, a session in which old emotional wounds can be revisited from a calmer internal position. Recurring dreams are, in part, the sign of a session that has not yet reached its conclusion. The continuity hypothesis of dreaming, developed by dream researcher G. William Domhoff over decades of systematic analysis, proposes that dreams do not create a separate inner reality. They continue the concerns, worries, and unfinished narratives of waking life. Your dream content reflects what your waking mind is most preoccupied with, most unresolved about, most quietly carrying. A recurring dream, then, is a recurring preoccupation. Something waking life has not yet given you the space, the time, or the internal resources to fully resolve. The dream is not separate from your life. It is a continuation of it, playing out in a different register. Memory reconsolidation is the process by which the brain reopens a stored memory, updates it with new context or emotional meaning, and stores it again in its revised form. It is how humans learn from experience, adapt to new information, and heal from old wounds. But for memories carrying strong emotional weight, grief, betrayal, fear, shame, the specific ache of something unfinished, reconsolidation requires more iterations. The brain must return, re-examine, update, and return again. The recurring dream is this process made visible, the brain still working on a file it has not yet been able to close. Not everyone has recurring dreams at the same frequency. Studies consistently suggest that people who report higher levels of unresolved stress, ongoing emotional conflict, or significant life transitions tend to have more recurring dream content, and that the frequency decreases as the underlying source of stress finds some form of resolution or integration. This is not coincidence. It is the brain's reporting system working exactly as designed. The more unfinished business there is, the more urgently the sleeping brain's filing system attempts to complete it. The dream frequency is not a symptom to be treated. It is a signal to be understood. The brain operates a prioritization system for memory consolidation during sleep. Emotionally significant memories are flagged during the day and given special attention at night. They receive more replay time, more rounds of reconsolidation, more dedicated processing resources than neutral memories. This is why a mundane encounter from last Tuesday fades quickly and completely, while a memory from 10 years ago that carried shame or unresolved conflict can still surface in your dreams tonight with undiminished clarity. Emotional weight is a flag. The flag says, do not archive this yet. The work is not done. We are still processing. When a person undergoes therapy for anxiety, unresolved grief, or post-traumatic stress, one of the most consistent, measurable outcomes is a meaningful reduction in recurring dream frequency. This reduction is not a side effect of treatment. It is direct evidence that recurring dreams are linked to unresolved emotional content, and that when that content is engaged and processed in waking life, the dreaming brain no longer needs to continue the work alone at night. The therapy did not silence the dream. It completed the task the dream was attempting to accomplish. The dream stops when the work is finally done. You know the feeling of something left unfinished. The way an incomplete conversation can sit in the mind for days. The way an unanswered question keeps surfacing no matter how many other things crowd around it. Psychologists call this the need for closure. And it runs deep. The mind seeks completion with a persistence that is almost compulsive, continuing to allocate attention to unresolved experiences until they reach some form of resolution. In dream science, the unfinished business of recurring dreams is not necessarily a single dramatic event. It can be a tone, a quality of relationship, a feeling that was set down before it could be resolved. The dream holds it because nothing else has. And this is only the beginning of what recurring dreams reveal about the way the unfinished loop actually works. The fact that the same dream returns is not evidence that you are stuck. It is evidence that something in you is still trying, still reaching toward a moment of resolution that waking life has not yet provided, still allocating the brain's most precious sleep resources to a problem it has not given up on. The loop runs because closing it matters. That is where the next 25 facts begin. At the question of what it takes for the brain to finally, gently, let the loop rest. The hippocampus, the brain structure most centrally associated with the formation and retrieval of memory, is unusually active during REM sleep. During waking hours, the hippocampus encodes new experiences, building the initial record of what happened. During sleep, it replays those experiences, selectively passing the most significant ones to the cortex for long-term storage. For memories carrying high emotional weight, this replay process can be interrupted, extended, or repeated across multiple sleep cycles, and then resumed across subsequent nights, until the emotional information attached to the memory has been sufficiently integrated. The recurring dream is this extended process made perceptible. There is a meaningful difference between a recurring dream and a repeating nightmare, and the distinction points toward different kinds of unfinished work. Recurring dreams often replay a scenario with minor variations each time, as if the brain is running the same simulation with slightly different parameters, testing whether a different version might resolve differently. Repeating nightmares tend to be more fixed in content, more literal in imagery, and more often linked to specific traumatic experiences. Each type reflects the brain working on a different category of emotional material, and each points toward a different kind of healing. Researchers studying dream content have consistently found that recurring dreams tend to involve scenarios of threat, pursuit, incompletion, or unpreparedness, exams not finished, luggage not packed, flights already missed. These scenarios map closely onto the specific anxiety patterns active in the dreamer's waking life. What the dreamer most fears failing at, most fears losing. These tend to appear in the dream as the thing that cannot be completed, the place that cannot be escaped. The dream does not predict the future. It is modeling the emotional logic of an unresolved fear, running the scenario so the emotional system can rehearse a response. Scientists studying REM sleep deprivation discovered something unexpected, that preventing REM sleep does not just affect dreaming. It impairs emotional regulation while awake, sometimes significantly. People deprived of REM sleep for even a few consecutive nights become measurably more emotionally reactive, less able to calibrate their threat responses, less capable of distinguishing between minor irritants and genuine dangers. The emotional processing that occurs during REM, including the processing embedded in recurring dreams, is not optional maintenance. It is part of the biological architecture of how the brain maintains balance. The dream is not decorative. It is essential. The amygdala, the brain's primary emotional processing center, remains highly active during REM sleep, even as the rational prefrontal cortex quiets substantially. This is why dream logic feels so different from waking logic. The emotional brain is directing the experience, and it does not follow the same rules of coherence and sequence that conscious thought does. A recurring dream driven by the amygdala will not respond to rational analysis applied from the outside. It will only shift when the emotional content it is processing finds a new outcome, either within the dream itself or through genuine resolution in waking life. Some recurring dreams are not organized around a specific event, but around a specific emotional frequency. The chronic feeling of being unprepared, of being unseen, of being fundamentally unworthy of belonging. These emotion-driven recurring dreams often originated in childhood or adolescence. During the formative years, when the emotional template for self-experience was being constructed, they persist into adulthood, not because the original situation is still present, but because the emotional pattern is. The brain continues to run, processing code that was written for a younger version of you, using emotional tools that were the best available then, still being applied now. The sleeping brain does not experience time the way the waking brain does. The temporal ordering that organizes conscious experience, the clear sense that the past is behind you and the present is now, partially dissolves during sleep. Past and present can collapse into each other. A memory from 10 years ago can feel as immediately vivid as something that happened this afternoon. This temporal collapse is part of why recurring dreams carry such urgency. The brain is applying the emotional processing resources appropriate to something current, to something that is, in waking life terms, long past. The distance you have traveled from an old wound does not always reach the dreaming mind. People who study lucid dreaming, the trainable state in which a person becomes consciously aware they are dreaming while the dream continues, have documented a striking pattern in relation to recurring dreams. Once a person achieves that awareness inside a recurring dream, the dream often stops recurring in subsequent nights. The mechanism appears to be that conscious awareness inside the dream provides the closing signal the brain was waiting for. The signal that the emotional material has been witnessed, that the loop has been acknowledged from within. Awareness, brought into the sleeping mind, can function as a form of resolution. The dream needed to be seen. Lucidity provided that. There is a particular category of recurring dreams that researchers describe as progressive recurring dreams, where the dream returns across weeks or months, but each version advances the narrative slightly. The dreamer finds a new door that was not there before. They make it further down the hallway. They reach the person they could not reach in previous versions. These progressive dreams offer compelling evidence that the brain is not mindlessly replaying the same loop, it is iterating, problem-solving, moving, however incrementally, towards something the story wants to end. The brain is working toward that ending, one sleep cycle at a time. The body is an active part of the recurring dream's language. The experience of paralysis, legs that refuse to move, a voice that will not come, a body frozen at the moment of greatest need, is among the most universally reported recurring dream experiences. And it is not purely metaphorical. During REM sleep, the body enters a state of actual muscular paralysis, designed to prevent the physical enactment of dream content. The brain knows the body cannot move, but the emotional system layers that physiological fact with meaning. I cannot escape. I cannot speak. I cannot act. The recurring dream takes the architecture of sleep itself and shapes it into the specific feeling of being trapped by something unresolved. Cross-cultural studies of recurring dreams have revealed a fascinating pattern. The emotional structure is remarkably consistent across vastly different cultures and historical periods. but the specific imagery varies significantly by cultural context. People across cultures dream of being chased, but the pursuer may be an animal, an authority figure, or something without clear form. People across cultures dream of incompletion, but the specific task reflects culturally specific expectations. The emotional architecture is universal. The narrative skin the brain wraps around it is local. The loop is the same across every language. Only the scenery changes to match the dreamer's world. Therapists working with bereaved clients often observe that recurring dreams featuring someone who has died tend to shift in quality across the arc of grief. In early grief, the recurring dream often features the person alive, the dreamer still unaware of what has happened, and the waking from this dream is a fresh bereavement each time. As grief is processed and integrated, the quality of the dream changes. The person is present and known to be gone, and the encounter carries a tone of connection rather than disorienting loss. The dream does not stop because grief is completed. It evolves because the relationship with the loss has changed. Resolution looks different from cessation. The narrative structure of a recurring dream, its setting, its characters, its emotional arc, is not random. It is the brain's most available metaphor for an unresolved internal state, assembled from whatever materials are closest to the feeling being processed. The specific person in the dream is not necessarily the actual person the dream is about. The specific location is not necessarily the actual site of the wound. The brain chose those elements because they carry the emotional frequency most proximate to what it is trying to process, using imagery as a placeholder for something that does not yet have direct language. The recurring dream is always a translation. The question is of what? Research on stress and dreaming has found that recurring dream activity tends to cluster around threshold moments. The periods immediately before and after major life changes, job loss, relationship endings, significant transitions of identity or circumstance. During these periods, the brain is simultaneously holding what was and integrating what now is. And the gap between those two states generates pressure on the dreaming system. Recurring dreams mark the seams of becoming, the edges where the old self has not yet handed off cleanly to whatever is emerging, where the brain is working hardest to bridge what was with what will be. What the first 25 facts tell us is not just about recurring dreams. They tell us something about the kind of mind that carries them. A mind that does not give up on unfinished experience, that keeps returning, that keeps believing. Somewhere beneath the level of conscious thought, that resolution is still possible. That persistence is not dysfunction. It is a form of devotion. The brain's expression of the fact that what happened to you mattered enough to continue. What the next arc asks is different, not why the loop runs, but what it actually needs to rest. Breathe here. Let the weight of what has been named settle gently. The brain that carries a recurring dream is a brain that has not given up on you. Emotional memory and episodic memory decay on different timescales. Episodic memory, the factual record of what happened, fades over time, losing resolution and vividness as years pass. But emotional memory, the feeling tone attached to what happened, can remain sharp and immediate long after the specific details have blurred or vanished. A recurring dream often draws primarily from emotional memory rather than the episodic record. This is why the dream frequently does not match the actual event it seems to be about. It is replaying the feeling, not the facts. And the feeling does not age the way the facts do. The brain does not only replay fear during sleep, it actively works to reduce it during REM. The emotional system re-engages with threatening memories while simultaneously working to revise the threat assessment, to update the emotional verdict. When this updating process is incomplete, the dream continues to replay. When it reaches a sufficient tipping point, when the emotional system has accumulated enough evidence that the feared outcome is no longer current, the dream frequency decreases and eventually stops. The brain is not just remembering in sleep. It is trying to learn its way past the fear while keeping the wisdom the fear contains. There is a consistent gap between a distressing event and its first appearance as significant dream content, typically ranging from 5 to 7 days, sometimes longer. The brain does not immediately incorporate highly distressing experiences into the dream cycle. It appears to wait until the memory has achieved some initial degree of consolidation before beginning the deeper processing work. This is why a brutal week at work may not appear in your dreams during that week, but surfaces unmistakably the following weekend, processed at the distance the brain required before it was ready to begin. People who tend to push away difficult thoughts, unwanted emotions, or uncomfortable memories tend to report more frequent and more intense recurring dreams. When the waking mind declines to engage with emotionally charged material, the sleeping mind must carry the full weight of that work alone. The dream cycle compensates by increasing both the frequency and intensity of the material being avoided. The loop runs longer not because the problem is more severe, but because no resolution is coming from the other side of sleep. What is avoided during the day becomes what the night must work harder on. The locations that appear in recurring dreams are rarely chosen at random. They tend to be places that were emotionally significant during particular periods of life. Childhood homes, schools, former workplaces, locations associated with relationships that mattered. The brain uses these locations as emotional containers, filing systems organized not by date, but by feeling. The place holds the emotional files associated with a particular period. And the recurring dream has returned to that folder because the files inside remain active, unarchived, still requiring attention. The dream does not go back to the place. It goes back to what the place holds. Some recurring dreams appear to be linked to a confusion in how memory is stored. When a feared outcome and the actual outcome of an event are encoded in close proximity in memory, the brain may construct a dream that fuses them, replaying the feared version of events alongside the real one, as if both are equally factual. In these cases, the recurring dream may not be primarily about what happened. It may be about what almost happened. The near miss that the emotional system could not definitively release. Still uncertain which version of the story is the one that needs to be resolved. There is growing evidence that recurring dreams can shift in emotional tone when a person begins a consistent practice of expressive writing or reflective journaling about the sources of waking life stress. The act of writing, of finding language for an emotional experience, of constructing a narrative around what was previously unstructured feeling, appears to reduce the pressure on the dreaming brain to perform that organizational work unassisted. Writing does not replace the emotional processing that sleep provides, but it can change what needs to be processed, making the emotional material slightly more organized before it enters the dream cycle, giving the sleeping brain a shorter path to completion. The running dream, in which the dreamer's legs move too slowly, the body refuses to respond, and the thing being fled gains ground, is one of the most consistently reported recurring dreams across cultures and age groups. Sleep researchers have noted that this experience maps with unusual precision onto the phenomenology of burnout, the specific feeling of sustained effort without forward movement, of trying harder without getting anywhere. The running dream is not only about anxiety in the abstract, it is often the body's most available metaphor for a life in which the demands being made have come to exceed what the self can give back. Recurring dreams in childhood tend to involve concrete, externalized threats, a monster, a specific feared scenario with immediate danger. Recurring dreams in adulthood tend to become progressively more abstract, a mood without a clear source, a presence without definite form, a location that holds dread without any identifiable reason for it. This developmental shift reflects the maturing brain's growing capacity to represent emotional experience symbolically rather than literally. Instead of a monster in the closet, the adult dreamer stands in a room and simply knows, without being able to say why, that something is wrong. The emotional vocabulary has grown more sophisticated. So has the dream. There is a consistent body of research supporting a technique in which a person writes down the recurring dream in detail, consciously rewrites the ending to one that carries a different emotional resolution, and rehearses the new version in the mind before falling asleep over successive nights. The brain appears to incorporate the rehearsed narrative into the dream cycle over time. The loop does not stop because the original experience was erased. It stops because the brain has been given a deliberately constructed alternative, a new way to end the story that the sleeping mind eventually adopts as its own. The recurring dream does not always carry the quality of something unwanted. Some people report recurring dreams that are not frightening but deeply comforting, a return to a place from the past that no longer exists in waking life, or the appearance of someone who has died. These comforting recurring dreams may serve a function distinct from fear, processing not the resolution of distress, but the maintenance of a meaningful connection. The dream becomes a kind of dedicated meeting place, a space the sleeping mind keeps open, not out of unfinished business, but out of something that functions more like loyalty. The refusal to let a connection simply disappear from inner life entirely. The timing of who appears in a recurring dream often carries more information than the identity of the person. Dream researchers have noted that the same relationship can produce very different recurring dream figures depending on which version of the self is doing the dreaming. The partner who appears in a dream during a period of fear is not the same emotional figure as the partner who appears during a period of loss, even if they share the same face. The cast of a recurring dream is assembled not by the relationship itself, but by the emotional chapter the dreamer was living when the unfinished experience began. During REM sleep, the brain activates a network of interconnected regions involved in mind wandering, autobiographical memory retrieval, self-reflection, and the ongoing construction of personal narrative during waking life. The recurring dream is, in significant part, an extension of the brain's lifelong project of making narrative coherence out of lived experience. It is not a separate process from the self. It is the self using its most dedicated processing time, the hours of REM sleep, to continue the work of understanding what happened and what it has made you. The ending of a recurring dream carries particular significance for the brain's processing work. Dreams that end in some form of resolution, even a partial, ambiguous, or modest resolution, tend to recur less frequently over time than dreams that end in unresolved tension or abrupt interruption. This is consistent with the reconsolidation model. The dream is attempting to reach a different endpoint, and a dream that manages to arrive at one, however imperfectly, has accomplished something of what the dreaming brain was working toward. A resolution, however small, is progress. The brain registers it. The loop loosens accordingly. The recurring dream is a patient correspondent. It does not require an audience. It simply returns. Across weeks and months and sometimes years, holding the same emotional material with steady attention, waiting quietly for the conditions under which it can be received differently than it has been before. There is something almost tender in this persistence, a part of you that has quietly decided this unresolved thing is worth returning to. That the work of resolution is worth the repeated effort until something shifts enough for the loop to finally rest. Something in the body knows when it is being witnessed. You do not have to do anything with what has been said, but if something has landed, some recognition, some quiet naming of a feeling you have been carrying, let your breath be the response. In and out, slowly. The body understands acknowledgement in a language older than words. The concept of closure, so frequently referenced in conversations about grief, the ending of relationships, and the aftermath of loss, has a genuine neurological basis. In the brain's operational terms, closure is the point at which a memory's emotional tag has been updated to accurately reflect its context. This experience belongs to the past, not to the present. This was real, and it is over. This hurt me, and I survived it and continued. Recurring dreams are continuing to run because that update has not yet been written with sufficient stability. They will stop when the update holds, when the emotional tag matches the actual facts of when and whether. Fear conditioning, the process by which the brain learns to associate a particular stimulus with a threat, is not erased by new learning. It is inhibited. A new memory is constructed that says this stimulus is now safe, but the original fear memory remains, can be reactivated under stress, and will re-emerge in dreams when the newer, calmer memory is weakened. This is why fear responses that seemed resolved can return in recurring dreams after years of apparent quiet. The original signal came back through. The inhibition had thinned. The recurring dream is not a relapse. It is the first memory asking to be worked on again. Recurring dreams often intensify during periods when sleep itself is poor, when sleep is fragmented, when REM cycles are cut short, when REM sleep is disrupted. The emotional processing that normally unfolds across a full night is compressed or truncated, and the brain, unable to complete its processing work before waking, schedules another attempt the following night. The dream material feels more urgent, more vivid, more intrusive, not because the underlying problem has worsened, but because the time available for processing it has been shortened. The loop gets louder when the space for it gets smaller. There is a pattern that emerges in people who wake from a distressing, recurring dream and immediately push the memory of it away, refusing to let it enter conscious awareness before returning to sleep. This reaction, while understandable, can paradoxically increase the frequency of the dream. The brain, denied the brief window in which waking consciousness could begin to integrate the surfaced material, interprets the suppression as evidence that the processing work remains incomplete, and schedules another attempt. Refusing to acknowledge what the dream surfaced tells the brain we are not done with this yet. Self-compassion research has produced an unexpected finding with direct relevance to recurring dreams. People who respond to their own pain, failure, or inadequacy with kindness and understanding, rather than harsh self-judgment, tend to report lower frequency and lower distress levels in recurring dream content over time. The proposed mechanism is consistent. Self-compassion reduces avoidance, increases willingness to remain present with difficult emotional material, and provides the waking brain with more of the processing resources the sleeping brain needs to complete its work. The kindness you extend to yourself during the day genuinely changes what the night has to accomplish. The brain's threat detection system operates on a fundamental principle when uncertain. Assume the threat is real and prepare accordingly. This system is extraordinarily effective in its original context. But in the modern world, the threats it responds to are frequently social, relational, and symbolic rather than physical. A recurring dream driven by threat detection may have nothing to do with physical danger. It is the brain applying the full force of its protective attention to something it has categorized as threatening to the self, to belonging, to reputation, to the security of attachment, and treating it with the same urgency it would once have reserved for something that required immediate escape. Some people find, without having made any deliberate intervention, that a recurring dream quietly stops after they have a significant conversation with someone connected to its emotional content. Not necessarily a fully resolved conversation, not a complete reconciliation, but a real one. One in which something true was said aloud and received by another person. The dream does not always require the problem to be fully solved. Sometimes it requires only that the emotional experience it has been holding in isolation be acknowledged, that the feeling be witnessed by at least one other person in waking life. The witness can be enough. There is a noteworthy relationship between recurring dreams and the ongoing process of identity development across the lifespan. Adolescents and young adults, in the midst of forming a stable sense of self, tend to show higher frequencies of recurring dream activity than people in settled midlife. But recurring dreams return in midlife as well, reliably. During periods of significant transition or re-evaluation, they appear at the edges of self-definition, at the boundaries where the story of who you are is being actively revised, where the old answer no longer fits and the new one is not yet clear. The recurring dream often contains a frozen moment, a specific scene that replays without ever reaching resolution, a threshold that is approached but never crossed. a confrontation that always stops just short of its conclusion. This frozen moment tends to be precisely where the emotional loading of the dream is highest, the site of greatest fear, greatest loss, greatest uncertainty. The dream returns to the frozen moment again and again because that is where the processing work is heaviest, where the brain is most committed and least equipped, where each replay is another attempt to move through the freeze and let that particular moment finally complete itself. The recurring dream is not a sign that you are haunted, or weak, or unable to move on. It is a sign that something in you is still working, still trying to write the sentence that finally answers what the loop has been carrying. The loop does not run because you are broken. It runs because something you experienced was significant enough to deserve resolution. What the second half traces is what that resolution looks like, not as an ending, but as a transformation in how the story is held. The middle of anything is its own kind of quiet. You have traveled far enough that the beginning is behind you, and not yet far enough that the end is visible. This is where the body can afford to let go of a little more weight. Just for now. Just here. Resolution in recurring dreams does not always look like the dream stopping. Sometimes it looks like the dream changing. A shift in the story the dreamer experiences not as a conscious decision, but as a spontaneous development within the dream itself. A person who has dreamed for years of being chased may find, one night, that they turn around to face whatever has been pursuing them, and the pursuer stops. The content has shifted without the dreamer consciously directing it. And this shift almost always coincides with a corresponding shift in the dreamer's waking relationship to the feared thing, a boundary finally drawn, a long-held position quietly released. The brain's capacity for emotional updating, for revisiting an established emotional memory and attaching new meaning to it, does not diminish with age. Neuroplasticity research has consistently shown that emotional memory can be reconsolidated and recontextualized throughout the entire human lifespan. A dream that has been running for 15 or 20 years can still find a genuine resolution. The length of the loop is not a predictor of its ability to close. The brain continues to offer the invitation, night after night, for as long as it needs to, because it has not given up on the possibility of completion. There is a meaningful relationship between recurring dreams and what psychologists call narrative identity, the ongoing story a person constructs about who they are, where they came from, and what their life means. Recurring dreams tend to appear at the fault lines of that narrative, the places where the story of the self does not quite hold together, where something happened that has not yet been successfully incorporated. The recurring dream is the brain's attempt to write the missing passage, to find language, meaning, and sequence for an experience that the conscious narrative has not yet found a way to carry. Mindfulness practice has been associated in research with a particular kind of change in the dream experience. Not necessarily a change in dream content, but a shift in the dreamer's relationship to what the dream presents. People with an established mindfulness practice tend to report less reactivity to distressing dream material, a greater capacity to observe recurring content without being fully overwhelmed by it, and a reduction in the residual distress that carrying a recurring dream generates across the day. The practice of witnessing experience without being fully captured by it appears to extend naturally into sleep. Attachment theory. the study of how early relational bonds shape the fundamental patterns of how a person connects and protects themselves in later relationships, intersects with recurring dream research in ways that illuminate some of the most persistent recurring dreams adults carry. People whose early attachment experiences were characterized by anxiety, inconsistency, or avoidance tend to have more recurring dream content centered on relationship threat and abandonment. The recurring dream about someone who left, about a bond that was never reliably secure. These may be the sleeping brain's long-term attempt to process attachment wounds that predate the specific relationship the dream features by decades. The dream is a rehearsal space. This is among the oldest and most persistent theories of dreaming, that the sleeping brain uses the dream to prepare the self for future experience, to practice emotional and behavioral responses to scenarios the waking self anticipates or fears. A recurring dream, in this frame, is a rehearsal that has not yet produced a satisfying result. The brain keeps calling rehearsal because the performance it is preparing for has not yet occurred in waking life, or has not yet been adequately prepared for. It will keep calling rehearsal until the emotional competence it is building has been genuinely acquired. There is a particular loneliness in carrying a recurring dream that deserves acknowledgement. The experience is private, in a way most waking experiences are not. You cannot show someone the loop your mind runs at 2 in the morning. You can describe it, but the specific weight of the return, the precise texture of the dread or the grief or the longing, does not fully translate. This is part of why recurring dreams can feel so exhausting to carry. There is no shared witness to the work the brain does at night. The loop runs in private, and the resolution, if and when it comes, arrives privately too. Research on trauma and dreaming has found that the content of trauma-related recurring dreams does not always mirror the traumatic event directly. The brain frequently transforms the specific content, altering the characters, changing the setting, rearranging the sequence, while preserving the emotional core of the experience with considerable fidelity. A person who survived a serious accident may not dream of accidents. They may dream of water, of falling, of a door that refuses to close. The brain found a different container for the feeling, one that is emotionally equivalent but symbolically displaced. The recurring dream is always a translation. The original text is the unprocessed emotion. Waking from a recurring dream and returning immediately to sleep frequently results in a direct continuation of the dream. The dream content remains highly active in working memory immediately after waking, and returning to sleep quickly reactivates the same processing pathway that was running, allowing even a brief period of wakefulness after a recurring dream. As little as 5 or 10 minutes of simply lying still appears to interrupt the continuation and can meaningfully reduce the intensity of the next processing attempt. A small pause after the dream can change what happens next in the sleep that follows. Some recurring dreams carry the quality of longing rather than fear, and this distinction matters for understanding what the brain is working on. The return to a childhood home, the appearance of someone who has died, the re-entry into a moment that was brief and good and is completely gone from waking life. These longing dreams are not seeking the resolution of a danger. They are seeking a form of reconnection with something that mattered and was lost. The brain returns to it for the same reason the waking mind returns to a cherished memory, because some things deserve to be revisited before they are finally released. The neurological overlap between grief and recurring dreams is more substantial than is generally recognized. In both processes, the brain is confronting the same fundamental challenge, integrating the reality of an absence, a person no longer present, a future that did not arrive, a version of the self that no longer exists. In grief, the brain returns again and again to the loss, attempting to make stable what resists stabilization. In recurring dreams, the brain stages the same returning, the same confrontation with what is gone. They are the same process, running in parallel registers. One waking, one sleeping, both learning to carry what cannot be retrieved. There is consistent evidence that social support reduces both the frequency and intensity of recurring dream activity. People who have the experience of being genuinely heard by someone they trust, of processing difficult emotional experiences in relationship rather than in isolation, tend to show measurably less burden in the dreaming brain's overnight processing work. The mechanism is direct shared processing reduces the load on the sleeping brain. When the waking self has been witnessed, the sleeping self needs to work less hard. We are not designed to process our hardest experiences alone, and the data reflects that plainly. The recurring dream frequently contains an element that the dreamer, even within the dream, avoids looking at directly. A door that is approached but not entered. A face just out of focus. A moment the dream self looks away from rather than toward. This internal avoidance mirrors the waking avoidance of the emotional material the dream is processing. The dreamer's dream self and waking self share the same protective instinct: do not go all the way in. Some part of the processing work stalls precisely at that moment of avoidance. The loop returns to just before the dreamer looks away, because that is where the unfinished work waits. Meaning-making. The process of constructing a narrative that holds what happened within a larger understanding has been shown across diverse populations to accelerate emotional processing and reduce the persistence of recurring dream activity. People who find ways to incorporate a difficult experience into a coherent story of who they are and what their life means tend to show faster resolution of recurring dream activity connected to that experience. The recurring dream is not waiting for the problem to disappear. It is waiting for the story to shift, for the experience to become something that can be carried differently, without the same perpetual urgency. Recurring dreams in people who have experienced significant relational difficulty often feature themes of failed communication, scenarios in which the dreamer speaks but is not heard, reaches out but is not met, tries to explain but cannot make the other person understand. These themes map directly onto the original relational wound, the experience of not being witnessed by someone who should have been present. The recurring dream is replaying the emotional logic of that absence, and in each iteration, searching, without yet finding, a version of the story in which the dreamer is finally, fully, adequately seen. The recurring dream often picks up not where the most recent dream left off, but where the unfinished emotional experience originally began, at the site of the first wounding rather than the most recent attempt to heal it. This is the brain's retrieval system, working with a precision that can feel uncanny. It is not searching for the last recorded location of the dream in the sequence of nights. It is searching for the last location of the unresolved feeling in the archive of experience. The loop returns to the source, because the source is where the real work is. There is a kind of dignity in the recurring dream that is rarely acknowledged. The loop persists not because the mind is weak or incapable of moving on. It persists because the mind is devoted to an experience that deserved more in the way of resolution than it received. Devoted to a version of the self that needed something and was not given it. The recurring dream is the mind's refusal to file an important experience as completed before it actually is. That refusal is not a failure. It is a form of integrity that deserves to be honored rather than managed away. Research in positive psychology has documented a consistent relationship between habitual gratitude practices and changes in dream quality over time. People who engage regularly in deliberate attention to positive experience, who make a practice of noticing what is working, what is good, what deserves acknowledgement in daily life, tend to show gradual reductions in threat-based dream content and gradual increases in neutral or positive dream material. What you habitually attend to during the hours you are awake shapes what the sleeping brain has to work with at night. The emotional register of waking life seeds the emotional register of dreaming. The recurring dream is a form of care directed inward. The mind that returns again and again to the same unresolved face, the same frozen scene, is a mind that has not abandoned its belief in resolution. That tenacity is not a malfunction. It is evidence of a self that believes, at a level beneath the reach of conscious decision, that what happened is still processable, that the loop can still close, that the story can still be completed differently. The care the brain brings to that unfinished experience is the same care it brings to everything that mattered. The neuroscience of hope, specifically, the anticipatory expectation that future states will be more workable than current ones, activates prefrontal circuits involved in planning and the allocation of cognitive resources towards solvable problems. When hope is present, the brain has more of what it needs to engage constructively with emotional processing. When it is absent, processing patterns become more rigid, more caught in loops that tighten rather than loosen. A dream in a person who has lost hope for resolution may run in progressively smaller circles, not because the loop cannot close, but because the brain has stopped allocating the resources required to find the way through. The authoritative voice that speaks in some recurring dreams, the voice that issues verdicts about the dreamer's worth, safety, or adequacy, is often recognizable as the voice of someone who held significant power during the dreamer's formative years. Dream researchers note that these voices frequently repeat things the dreamer was told in childhood or adolescence, messages about their competence, their value, their fundamental acceptability. The recurring dream is, in part, the continued presence of that original voice. And one of the most quietly profound forms of resolution is the dream in which the dreamer finally, gently, speaks back. There is a transition that some people describe in their long-term experience of a persistent recurring dream. A point at which the dream begins to feel less like something happening to them and more like something communicating with them. The quality shifts from intrusion to conversation. The dreamer's relationship to the dream moves from resistance and aversion to something closer to curiosity. And with that shift, the dream itself begins to change. What was pursuing becomes accompaniment. What was threatening becomes illuminating. The loop does not end at that moment, but its quality transforms. And the transformation is itself a form of progress. The recurring dream unfolds in a language of metaphor, a language in which a single image can carry multiple meanings, in which a single scene can hold years of emotional history. Learning to work with this language, not to decode it rigidly, but to sit with it and notice what feeling it produces. To ask what part of waking life it seems to be in conversation with, can shift the recurring dream from an experience of haunting to an experience of instruction. The dream is not trying to frighten you. It is trying to show you something in the only language available to it in the dark. There is something the brain does not tell you when you are in the middle of a recurring dream. It does not announce the loop is getting shorter or that the scenario is changing. It simply runs the material again and again, with an incremental adjustment each time that is too small to notice in the moment, but significant across months. The progress of a recurring dream is not visible from inside it. It can only be seen in retrospect, in the way the feeling upon waking has grown quieter, in the way the dread has been replaced by something closer to familiarity. Recurring dreams will stop when they have done their work, not a moment sooner, and not because you forced them to. The loop is not a failure of the mind. It is the mind's most devoted labor. The brain runs the loop because it believes, correctly and tenderly, that resolution is still possible, that the door the loop keeps returning to can still open. The remaining facts carry this truth in a quieter register, closer to the body, already beginning to let go. There is a particular quality to arriving somewhere you have been working toward without knowing. The body feels it before the mind does. A release, a settling, as though something that had been holding on has chosen, quietly, to let go. Let that quality move through you now. The end of a recurring dream is rarely dramatic. It does not arrive with announcement or ceremony. People who have lived with a recurring dream for years and then watched it stop often describe the realization arriving weeks or months after the fact. A moment of noticing that the dream has not returned, and then realizing it has been a while. The closing happens in the margins of an ordinary day. After a decision finally made, or a feeling finally allowed to be felt, without being immediately managed away. Sleep researchers have documented moments within recurring dreams in which the dreamer unexpectedly gains agency within a scenario that had previously felt fixed and inescapable. They face the pursuer rather than fleeing. They open the locked door. They find the words they could never find before. These moments tend to cluster in the period just before a recurring dream stops entirely. They appear to signal that the emotional rehearsal has achieved its objective, that the self inside the dream has acquired what it was practicing toward all along. There is something genuinely generous about the brain's persistent investment in recurring dreams. It does not abandon the unfinished emotional work because the work is difficult, or because previous attempts did not succeed, or because the material has been circling for years. It continues to allocate the time, to construct the setting, to assemble what it needs to run the scenario again. This is not what rumination looks like. Rumination spins in place. This is dedication. the brain's patient commitment to the proposition that resolution is still achievable. When a recurring dream ends, there is often a corresponding shift in waking life. Not always externally visible, but something internal and real. A particular relationship carries less weight. A decision that seemed impossible becomes possible. A memory that felt present begins, gradually, to feel like the past it actually is. The processing the dream was conducting while you slept has completed its work, and waking life adjusts accordingly. The sleep and the waking are not separate systems. They are the same river, running in different light. The recurring dream does not ask to be remembered when it ends. It will simply stop coming. And something in you will be different for the work it quietly did. Every loop that closes leaves behind a kind of space. The space where an unresolved thing no longer lives. That space is not empty in the way a loss leaves emptiness. It is available for something new, for something quieter, for a kind of rest that the loop had been occupying without either party fully knowing it. The stopping is gradual, like a tide retreating, not all at once, but incrementally, each night a little further back, until one night the dream simply does not come, and eventually the absence becomes the new ordinary. The loop unwound itself quietly. It is possible you will sleep through the ending. It is possible you already have. And the new quiet has not yet reached your conscious awareness. The capacity to tolerate uncertainty, to remain present with an unresolved situation without forcing a premature conclusion, is one of the qualities most consistently associated with psychological resilience. Recurring dreams are the brain's most sustained training ground for this capacity, the practice of returning to the same difficult material, without demanding that it resolve, without fleeing the discomfort of its persistence. Every night you have carried a recurring dream without being destroyed by it, is evidence of a resilience you may not have given yourself sufficient credit for. The content of a recurring dream frequently softens over time. Even when the dream has not stopped, the thing that was pursuing gradually slows. The locked room becomes fractionally more accessible. The sense of dread begins to be tinged with something more nuanced. Not dread alone, but dread alongside something that might be called familiarity. This softening is the incremental progress of the brain's processing work. Not yet complete, but further along than before. Progress in emotional processing rarely announces itself. It arrives in changes of texture. Unresolved emotional memory can be held apart from the rest of a person's story, isolated, still carrying the charge of the original moment, unable to settle into the past where it belongs. Recurring dreams represent the brain's repeated attempts to bring that isolated memory into connection with the rest of what the self knows, to give it time and context and meaning. The dream is doing this work gently, one night at a time, trying to help the past finally feel like what it actually is. People who have successfully worked through the central emotional material of a long-running recurring dream often report that the change extends beyond the dream itself. The waking experience of situations related to the dream's emotional content changes as well. A confrontation that previously induced panic begins to feel manageable. A memory that had felt fully present begins to feel genuinely historical. The dream did not only process an emotion, it changed the brain's fundamental relationship to the material, and that change persists across the boundary between sleep and waking. The recurring dream does not always require a decisive resolution to stop. Sometimes it simply shifts into something unrecognizable, takes on new characters, a new setting, a new emotional quality, and what had made it recurring dissolves into the broader stream of ordinary dreaming. The loop breaks not because it found a triumphant ending, but because the emotional charge powering it finally discharged. The current ran until the battery emptied, and then there was only sleep. Ordinary, uninsistent, cycling without the weight of return. There is a form of resolution that arrives not from solving the problem, but from accepting it cannot be fully solved. That some losses are permanent. Some questions will not receive satisfying answers. In these cases, the dream ends not because the wound healed, but because the dreamer found a way to carry what cannot be healed. A place inside the self, where the unresolvable can live without requiring constant attention. Acceptance is its own form of closing. The wound does not disappear. It is given a home. What the recurring dream has been training, across however many months or years it ran, is the capacity to stay present with what is hard without being destroyed by it. The emotional intelligence required to remain in genuine relationship with a recurring dream, to hold the feeling it surfaces with curiosity rather than pure aversion, is the same intelligence that enables richer relationships, more honest self-knowledge, and more adaptive responses to difficulty. That capacity is not incidental to a good life. It is at the center of one. There is a quality to the final stages of a recurring dream that some people describe as a change in light. The dream environments, once vivid and saturated with urgency, begin to feel slightly more ordinary, less heightened, less insistent. Sleep researchers note that this shift in vividness often signals a corresponding shift in amygdala activity. The brain is paying slightly less emergency attention to this material. The light has begun to normalize. The loop is winding down. The moment when a recurring dream finally shifts. When the dreamer turns to face what has been pursuing them. When the person they have been reaching for becomes reachable, is almost never described as triumphant. It is described as quiet. A sense of, oh, so this is what was needed. It is rarely dramatic. It is often, unexpectedly, tender. A moment of recognition rather than victory. Of something clicking gently into place. The brain does not celebrate its own resolution. It simply registers it and moves on. Research on post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon in which people emerge from adversity genuinely changed in ways they value, consistently identifies sustained engagement with difficult experience as a central factor. The people who grow after loss, after rupture, after the kinds of experiences that recurring dreams are built from, are not people who avoided the difficulty. They are people whose minds continued to work on the experience rather than sealing it off. The mind that keeps returning is also the mind most likely to arrive somewhere new. The end of a recurring dream is sometimes preceded by a single dream that feels different. A one-time encounter with new imagery. A scene that does not recur, but carries a quality of completion. The dreamer recognizes instinctively. Something was finished. Something arrived at its destination. These final, non-repeating dreams are rarely interpretable by the usual logic of waking thought. But they carry a quality the dreamer recognizes without being able to fully explain. this one felt like a goodbye. And then the loop does not return. Your brain has been keeping a record of your experience in a language that bypasses the rational mind. It stores what you felt before you had words to name it. It holds what you needed before you knew how to ask for it. The recurring dream is the surface expression of that record, the mind's attempt to make the unspeakable available for processing. You were never required to understand it fully. You were only required to keep returning, and you have. The brain does not require your active participation to process the material in a recurring dream. It will do the work whether or not you remember the dream, whether or not you analyze it. But simple attention, willingness to sit for a moment with the feeling it leaves behind without immediately trying to explain it, does appear to accelerate the work. The brain works well alone, but it works faster when the waking self is willing to be a quiet partner rather than an obstacle. The recurring dream is among the mind's most honest communications. It does not perform for an audience. It does not manage your comfort or arrange its content to be easier to receive. It surfaces what is unfinished, regardless of whether you feel ready, because the brain has concluded that readiness is less important than persistence, that every return is another opportunity. Even when the current opportunity yields no visible progress, there is no timeline on the brain's patience. It will return as many nights as the work requires. By the time a recurring dream ends, something has happened in the self that was carrying it. Not the kind of transformation that announces itself, the kind that happens quietly, in the dark, perceivable only in retrospect, in the way a particular weight is no longer present. In the space where the loop used to live, you were changed by the work your mind did while you were unconscious. The change arrived without your awareness. In the ordinary hours of sleep, there is no moment at which the brain issues a final verdict that a recurring dream has completed its work. There is no threshold reached, no signal, no file stamped closed. The stopping is gradual, each night a little further back, until one night the dream simply does not come, and eventually the absence becomes the new baseline. What had run for months or years is simply no longer part of the night. The new quiet settles in so gently it takes a while to notice it is there. The last appearance of a recurring dream is almost never recognized as such in the moment. There is no internal signal to say this was the last iteration. You will most likely not know it was the last time until weeks or months afterward, when you notice with quiet surprise that the dream has not returned. And in that noticing, there may be something like gratitude for whatever the dream accomplished across however many nights it ran, for a mind that would not let an important thing go unfinished. You have been carrying this loop for however long you have been carrying it, and you are still here, still sleeping, still waking, still holding the unfinished thing with enough steadiness to let it continue its work. That is not a small thing. The fact that the loop runs is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence that you have not given up on yourself, that the belief persists that the loop can close, that the story can still find its way to a different kind of ending. Recurring dreams will stop. Not because you force them to, not because you finally find the interpretation that unlocks them. They will stop because the brain is a patient problem solver. And the problem it has been working on is the problem of you, how to carry what happened, how to return the past to where it belongs, so that the present can be lived without the weight of what was not yet complete. The loop is not permanent. It is a process, and every process, given enough willingness to return, finds its way to rest. The loop is, even now, a little more held than it was an hour ago. Something was acknowledged tonight that did not have language before. Let that acknowledgement settle into the body, into the places where unfinished things live. The work your mind does while you sleep is not separate from you. It is the most devoted part of you, still working in the dark on your behalf. The mind that carries a recurring dream is not a troubled mind. It is a devoted one, devoted to an experience that deserved more than it received, devoted to a version of the self that needed something and waited, devoted to the quiet belief that resolution is still possible, that some part of the story can still be written differently. 100 facts have moved through this hour, and underneath, all of them has been a single current. The loop you carry is not evidence of what you could not do. It is evidence of what you would not let go of. And there is a profound difference between those two things. Dream science has been asking, across many hours, what the sleeping brain is really doing in the dark, how it processes what waking life cannot hold, how it finds its way toward integration across the long span of a life. The next video in Dream Science begins where tonight ended, with the question of what happens when the loop breaks entirely open, when the dream stops trying to resolve and begins instead to reveal. That hour is waiting whenever you are ready. You can allow the thoughts to drift now, like the last image of a dream beginning to soften at the edges. Let your breath find the pace it uses when nothing is required of it. Sleep carries you to where the loop can finally rest. But if your eyes are closed, stay there. Rest well. Devoted mind. The dream ran because you did not give up on yourself. And that is the most important thing this hour was quietly saying. Fall asleep to gentle facts, where science meets sleep. Good night.